Hey guys, tonight we slip onto a cold, half-lit shoreline somewhere in Viking Scandinavia, where the wind already feels like it's judging your life choices. The sea is a long stretch of steel blue calm for now, and fishermen are rising slowly from their turf-roofed homes, rubbing sleep from their eyes and squinting at the sky like they're waiting for it to confess something. A couple of them glance at you as if to say, "You probably won't survive this," which, honestly, fair. These waters don't care about your personality or your fitness tracker. They care about the weather, and the weather changes its mind faster than a toddler near a cookie jar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on frost-kissed pebbles as dawn slides slowly across the sky. The horizon glows pale yellow, thin as the edge of a bronze blade. The fishermen around you don't speak loudly. Their voices stay low, almost whisper-soft, the way people talk in a library or during a horror movie when they're pretty sure something is hiding behind the door. Viking fishing culture wasn't all raids and axes. Most days were spent doing quiet, slow, repetitive tasks that would bore modern adrenaline seekers into a coma. But inside that slowness lived survival. You didn't get dramatic storms with heroic music cues. You got small signs, subtle shifts, whispers from the sea. You follow one fisherman, broad-shouldered, blonde beard stiff with the night's frost, as he kneels and presses his hand against the stones. He's not petting the beach. His feeling for temperature. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Viking fishermen used ground warmth at dawn as one of their earliest weather indicators. Cooler than normal stones sometimes meant incoming winds from the north, and northern winds brought the kind of storms that tossed longships around like cheap toys. He doesn't explain this to you. He just grunts softly, nods, and moves on, as if the stones have delivered their morning gossip. Nearby, a young fisherman squints at the horizon so intensely that you half expect him to develop superpowers. He's watching the first thin line of fog barely visible, hovering low over the waves. You don't see anything special yet, but he does. Fog is the Viking's silent text message from nature. A thicker, rolling fog means moisture rising fast from the sea surface, which can signal an approaching pressure shift. A delicate ribbon of fog, that's the sea saying, "Relax." Nothing dramatic yet. Maybe, of course, there's a fringe tidbit too. Some Viking villages believed that if you whispered into the fog before a voyage, the fog would carry your words forward and soften the sea's temper. Yes, weather ASMR. You watch a fisherman mutter something toward the mist. Maybe a prayer, maybe a complaint about taxes. No judgment. You trudge farther along the shore, boots sinking slightly into wet sand. The tide is low and steady, with no dramatic movements, but the fishermen don't trust dramatic. They trust patterns, tiny ones. One older man crouches and stares at a shallow pool left by the tide. He taps the edge with a stick and watches the ripples as if he's reading a secret code. And in a way, he is. A ripple that moves too quickly might hint that distant winds are already stirring the surface. A slow, lazy ripple suggests the sea is still half asleep, the maritime equivalent of hitting the snooze button. You notice the fishermen rarely look directly at the sky. They're more interested in what the sky does to everything else. The water, the stones, the birds, even the smell of the air. That's where the truth hides. And it's why these men survived centuries before meteorological charts. But scholars still argue whether Vikings had an organized system of weather reading, or whether each fishing family passed down their own quirky methods. With how differently each man here examines the morning, you suspect both theories are true, and neither fully captures the lived experience. Weather wasn't studied. It was felt, A light breeze brushes past your cheek, bringing with it a scent you can't quite name. Slightly metallic, slightly warm. The fisherman beside you nods slowly. Salt smell is one thing, but the temperature of that smell, that's a Viking skill. Warmer scent can indicate southerly winds, and southerly winds are usually calm, friendly, maybe even a little cozy in their own Scandinavian way. You breathe in again, trying to smell the difference. You fail. A seagull laughs at you, rude. As the fishermen prep their small boats, you hear them muttering familiar weather whispers. Tiny, shared signals pass through generations. A tightening rope means the air is drying. A loosening knot means moisture is rising. A net that feels unusually heavy before being used. Some fishermen took that as a sign to stay close to shore that day. One man lifts his net, feels the fibers, and shrugs. Today's net is neutral, Switzerland, but rope. You watch them pack the boats, nets, wooden floats, small charms carved from bone. You ask one fisherman what the charm means. He mutters something like keeps the sea polite. You don't question it. Some days, everyone deserves a charm to keep the universe polite. Then the wind shifts slightly, not much, just enough to stir your hair. The fishermen pause, all at once, like wolves lifting their heads at the same distant sound. The shift isn't dangerous. It's just information, a cue. The day will stay calm until midday. After that, the sea will decide. You realize, suddenly, that these whispered signs, these subtle codes, these quiet checks, they're not superstition. They're a survival language built into muscle memory. They're small truths hidden inside a world that rarely explains itself. And as your breath fogs the cold morning air, you sense it too. The sea is whispering. You're beginning to understand. You step onto the groaning wooden dock just as the fishermen begin hauling their gear toward their boats. The planks beneath your feet creak in protest, swollen slightly from yesterday's tide, and every sound seems exaggerated in the chilled morning air. Somewhere behind you, a gull argues loudly with another gull. About what? You have no idea, but the fishermen barely glance up. Their attention is already drifting toward the sea, which glimmers like polished steel under a sky that hasn't yet decided what mood it wants to be in. You follow the oldest fisherman toward the edge of the dock. His boots thump steadily, each footstep a reminder that these boards have carried generations before him. He doesn't speak yet. Viking fishermen didn't waste words. They saved their voices for hauling nets, calling warnings, or yelling at storms which, judging by the wrinkles carved deep around his eyes, he has done many times. He stops, lifts his chin, and sniffs the air. You stare at him. He keeps sniffing. You try sniffing too, but all you get is cold. The old man seems satisfied with the results, though. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Viking fishermen were known for using scent. Yes, scent, to judge upcoming weather. A faint metallic tang often meant shifting pressure, while a warmer, almost earthy smell suggested calmer tides. These tiny changes were easier to catch at dawn, when the air was crisp and unpolluted by smoke from cooking fires or the day's bustle. You smell nothing distinct. He smells a novel's worth of foreshadowing. He gestures for you to kneel beside a coil of rope. You crouch, unsure what you're supposed to do. He pinches part of the rope between his fingers and waits. You do the same. Within moments, you feel it, the fibers tightening ever so slightly, as if the rope has taken a deep breath. The man nods. Moisture in the air is dropping. That means the morning will stay dry for a while. Then he hands you the rope. You hold it like it's an exam you didn't study for. The rope loosens, softening gently in your hands. The fisherman taps the side of your arm, an unspoken reminder that everything, even rope, reacts to weather if you know what to look for. A younger fisherman jogs over, carrying a wooden bucket half filled with seawater. He sloshes it lightly, examining the surface as though expecting it to answer existential questions. The old man nods for you to watch. The younger fisherman dips 2 fingers in and lifts them to his cheek. The water temperature is slightly warmer than the air, a detail the Vikings treated like a whispered prophecy. Warm water plus cold air could mean fog later, maybe even a light swell. You lean in, but before you can ask questions, a low whistle echoes from the far end of the dock. 3 fishermen look up toward the sky, following the path of a small cluster of seabirds flying unusually low, almost skimming the surface of the waves. Birds, it turns out, are nature's unwilling meteorologists. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some Viking communities believed that if seabirds flew close enough to touch the water with their wingtips, a storm wasn't far behind. Others believed birds simply flew low when they were tired. And scholars today still argue whether Viking bird-based weather predictions were reliable science or very confident guesswork. Judging by how seriously these fishermen are taking it, you suspect the birds know something. The flock dips low again. The men trade glances. One murmurs something that sounds like, "Not today, not yet." You glance at the fishing boats tied to the dock, sleek, narrow, carved with dragon motifs that look mildly annoyed. They bob gently in the tide, each movement a reminder that the sea never sits still. The fishermen begin loading their gear. You hear the clunk of wooden floats, the scrape of fish spears, the thud of heavy nets. Everything is arranged with practiced efficiency, as if the tools themselves know their places. One man sharpens a small iron hook, stone rasping softly along the metal. Another checks the tarred seams of the boat with a pointed bone tool. A third tests the tension on a sail rope, leaning back with his full weight until the beam above him groans. They work without chatter. Every action is deliberate. Every gesture is a conversation with the sea. You try lifting a section of the net and nearly strain your shoulder. The fisherman watching you tries not to laugh, but a smile slips through his beard anyway. Heavy nets, lighter days, his expression seems to imply. Light nets, prepare your will. A sudden breeze brushes past you, swirling across the dock. Several men freeze mid-motion. The air carries a faint shift, barely noticeable, but enough for them to exchange raised eyebrows. No one panics, but they all pause. They listen. They wait. You remember what one fisherman told you earlier. The sea speaks before it acts. Most people don't bother to listen. You exhale slowly and try listening. Really listening. The waves sound different, softer, as if the wind is pressing down on them gently. The ropes along the dock creak in a new rhythm, one you didn't notice before. Somewhere far out, a gull gives a sharp, singular cry instead of its usual screeching monologue. The old fisherman places a hand on your shoulder. He points to the horizon, barely perceptible ripples shifting direction. Not dangerous, just informative. This, you realize, is their whispered sign language. With the weather, they don't wait for a storm to show itself. They read the footnotes, the side comments, the unspoken warnings. As the men finish preparing the boats, you notice a small charm tied near the front of one vessel, a wooden amulet carved in the shape of a fish. You ask another fisherman what it's for. To keep the sea from being petty, he mutters. Honestly, same energy as half your coping mechanisms. You step back as they begin pushing the first boat toward the water. The dock groans again. Nets thump. Sails snap softly. A sense of calm purpose settles over the entire group. They're not rushing. They're not delaying. They're simply moving with the rhythm the morning has offered them. And as the boat glides toward the sea, a realization tightens gently in your chest. These people didn't survive because they were fearless. They survived because they learned to notice the moments most people ignore. You take one last look at the horizon before stepping aside. The sea breathes. The air shifts. The whispers continue, and you're starting to hear them too. You walk along the shoreline now, boots sinking into the damp sand with each slow step. The tide is retreating, leaving behind shimmering patches of seawater that reflect the grey-blue sky like scattered mirrors. You squat near one of the pools, your breath forming a soft cloud in the morning chill. The old fisherman crouches beside you, resting his weight on his knuckles the same way a wolf settles into the snow, steady, wordless, patient. He points at the sand. At first, you see nothing. Then he drags a finger through the sand and reveals a faint ripple so delicate it looks like something brushed by the wing of a ghost. The fisherman nods as if this tiny, barely visible line has told him the entire plot of tomorrow's weather. You stare at the ripple. It stares back. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Viking fishermen used the texture of sand left by the tide as a form of natural barometer. Fine, tightly packed ripples meant the wind had blown steadily during the night. Messy, uneven patterns meant turbulence, offshore conditions that could turn from adventurous to please update your will very quickly. The old man gently taps the ripple again. Smooth, predictable, a calm morning. You nod, pretending this makes perfect sense, even though the pattern still looks vaguely like a misplaced fingerprint. As you stand, the younger fisherman jogs toward you, holding something between his palms. He opens his hands to reveal a small clump of sea foam, not the pretty kind that swirls at your feet in gentle waves, but the sticky, clingy kind that looks like it's considering whether to crawl away on its own. He dips 2 fingers into it, lifts them, and waits for you to smell. It smells like sea, and maybe disappointment. He nods at your baffled expression and points toward the horizon. Foam like this clings more stubbornly when the water is dense, meaning colder currents are pushing in. That often signaled a weather shift later in the day, sometimes a breeze, sometimes a fog bank, sometimes a whoops. We live on the ocean, and the ocean is moody. You make a mental note. Trust foam, even when it looks gross. A quirky tidbit floats in next. Some Viking families believed that if sea foam formed little crowns that held their shape for more than a few heartbeats, the gods were warning sailors to stay close to shore. Others believed it meant absolutely nothing and was just the sea being dramatic. And historians still argue whether these interpretations were based on genuine long-term observation or simply superstition that happened to stick around like stubborn barnacles. While you're contemplating whether you should start a foam-based skincare brand, a gust of wind lifts the hem of your cloak. The fisherman frees again, not in fear, but in the way people freeze when a familiar friend enters the room. The breeze carries a new texture, drier, sharper. You taste salt on your lips before you even realize your mouth was slightly open. The old fisherman tilts his head. South, his expression says. Wind coming from the south. Warm, gentle, probably safe. But then he narrows his eyes. Not steady. It flickers, wavers. You follow his gaze toward the horizon. The clouds look normal at first. Soft, layered, shifting lazily. But the fisherman lifts your chin slightly, directing your eyesight to the very edge where 2 types of clouds overlap, a faint diagonal line cutting across the sky. You wouldn't have noticed it in a million years. This subtle line marks a pressure shift, a small one, but enough for these fishermen to treat it as a whispered warning. You squint harder and begin to see it. High, thin clouds drifting in one direction, lower ones moving in another. The sky is telling 2 different stories. The fishermen gather around, murmuring, their voices low, rhythmic. They aren't panicking. They're planning, thinking, weighing choices. You can almost hear their thoughts. Is it too early to change direction? Will the wind hold for the afternoon? Do we trust the ripples or the foam? You feel like you've walked into an ancient board meeting where the board members wear fur cloaks and smell faintly of cod. One of the younger fishermen kneels and presses his palm flat against the sand. The surface trembles slightly with the rhythm of tiny waves. He nods, then lifts his hand to show you grains of sand sticking to his skin. Coarse sand means the sea pushed harder than usual overnight. That means unstable currents. That means, well, not doom exactly, but maybe don't start long philosophical conversations about fate while rowing too far from land today. You rub your own hand in the sand and check. Nothing sticks. It feels like brushing flour off a cutting board. The fishermen glance at your hand, then at each other. One snorts, another groans in amusement. Apparently, your hands are not calibrated for Viking science. The old man motions for you to follow him down the beach toward a cluster of rocks half buried in tide pools. You step carefully, trying not to slip on seaweed that looks suspiciously like it's plotting against you. He points to a shallow puddle reflecting the sky. The water swirls slowly, not from wind, but from temperature differences. He places your hand above the surface, not touching it, and waits. You feel a faint warmth rising from the pool. Warm water trapped in rocks, cool wind above it. This temperature contrast creates tiny swirling currents, what Viking fishermen called whisper pools. They believed these pools could hint at future currents offshore. You lean closer, watching the delicate swirl spin like a slow-motion coin flip. The old man nods. He trusts the whisper pool, more than he trusts the clouds, more than he trusts the foam. You stand quietly with him for a moment, listening to the low hum of the tide, letting the wind graze your cheek. There's a strange calm in this slow, deliberate watching of nature's tiny signals. It feels like decoding secrets left by the sea, secrets that don't shout, but whisper. And as you lift your eyes to the horizon again, you realize something. Weather doesn't begin with clouds or waves. It begins with tiny things. Ripples in sand, foam sticking too long, wind shifting half a breath. The fishermen start to head back toward the dock. You follow, boots crunching softly on wet sand. You feel like you've passed the first test of a very slow, very wind-dependent initiation. And the whispers of the sea, you're hearing them a little more clearly now. You follow the fishermen farther along the ridge until the ground gives way to a narrow spit of land jutting into the water, a place where the sea widens into a glassy stretch of grey-blue. The wind is barely a whisper here, soft enough that you almost forget you're standing in Viking country, a place where storms punch out of nowhere with the anger of a grumpy god who hasn't had his morning mead. The air carries a faint saltiness, gentle enough to feel harmless, and you'd almost believe this morning will stay calm except the men stop walking. All of them. At once, they tilt their heads upward. So you do too. Above you, seabirds paint the sky in looping strokes, gulls, kittiwakes, puffins commuting between nest and sea, like exhausted office workers who haven't taken a day off since the last ice age. Their wings cut arcs into the muted light, and the fishermen watch them the way modern meteorologists stare at satellite images, professionally, obsessively, and with the deep understanding that one wrong interpretation means everyone gets soaked. The birds aren't just background noise in this world. They're messengers, indicators, living weather vanes with feathers and questionable hygiene. A mainstream historical fact unfolds in your memory. Viking fishermen used seabird flight patterns as a primary form of weather prediction, especially before long-distance sailing. Not just the direction they read, altitude, formation, speed, and even the weird little hesitation birds make when wind shifts unexpectedly. One fisherman points to a cluster of gulls flying unusually low, skimming the surface like they're late for an appointment underwater. You notice how close their wings come to the sea, sometimes brushing it with the faintest silver streak. They're telling us something, the old fisherman murmurs. And you suddenly understand why the Vikings gave animals a kind of mythic respect. This isn't superstition. It's observation sharpened across generations of people who absolutely did not have the luxury of checking a weather app. Out here, missing a sign could mean coming home with dinner, or not coming home at all. You squint at the birds. They look like birds. That's it. Feathered sky potatoes. It's impressive and moderately insulting that Vikings could read so much from creatures that spend half the day arguing over fish guts. The fishermen gesture for you to walk closer to the cliff edge. From here, you can see even more movement. Thin lines of kittiwakes carving diagonal paths in the sky, shifting angles as if following invisible roads. It's like watching a map redraw itself in real time. A quirky tidbit resurfaces. Some Viking villages believed that if seabirds circled counterclockwise above the bay, it meant a storm spirit was approaching from the west. They even had a nickname for these circles, the tightening rope. The idea was that each lap shrank the loop, pulling the storm in closer, like the sky was cinching itself into a knot. And right now you notice it, the birds are beginning to circle, slowly, broadly, but definitely counterclockwise. One fisherman mutters something under his breath. You don't speak Old Norse fluently, but you're pretty sure the vibe translates to, well, that's inconvenient. The circles tighten just a little, not enough to panic, but enough for every man here to take a long, slow breath. You watch their faces calm, resigned, deeply attentive. These people live in a world that listens to the natural cues modern folks mostly ignore because they're too busy debating weather apps that can't agree on anything. A young fisherman points upward, drawing your attention to a curious pattern. A flock of puffins is flying inland, not out to sea. You raise an eyebrow, assuming puffins are just doing puffin things, but the men shake their heads. Puffins prefer the open sea when waters are calm. They only retreat inland when air pressure shifts sharply, long before human ears feel the first change. You try to listen, expecting to hear some dramatic rumble or godlike whisper. Nothing, just the sea breathing steadily, patient and ancient. Historians still argue whether seabird behavior influenced more than weather predictions. Some claim it shaped Viking navigation routes, guiding ships towards safe channels based on migration paths. Others argue the opposite, that birds were merely one tool among many, not the central guiding force. But watching the fishermen now, seeing how their bodies subtly reposition to face the direction the birds flee from, you can tell this isn't decorative knowledge. It's survival knowledge. A line of turns, a dozen of them, suddenly shifts direction mid-air. No hesitation, no wobble, just an instant, coordinated pivot, like they're performing sky ballet choreographed by a god with trust issues. The fishermen inhale sharply. That's the wind turning. One murmurs. You wait. 2 heartbeats. 3. Then a faint, almost shy breeze brushes your cheek. The birds knew before you did. Another fisherman crouches near the edge of the cliff, watching a lone gull that seems to be struggling to maintain height. It beats its wings harder than the others, rising only to be pushed lower again. Low altitude struggle, rapid wing beat correction, angle deviation toward the cliffs. None of these things matter to you immediately. To the fishermen, they're neon signs. One man finally speaks. Storm by nightfall. You blink. Already? The sky looks fine, calm, unbothered. The kind of sky that would lie straight to your face about the chaos it's planning later. You watch as more birds drift inland, quietly, swiftly, without ceremony. They know what's coming. The fishermen look at each other, exchanging short nods, the kind that pass entire conversations with no words. Plans begin shifting, routes reconsidered, nets repacked. You can almost hear the gears turning as every man mentally adjusts the shape of the day. One fisherman pats your shoulder gently. You see now, he says, why we watch the birds. You nod, though you're still thinking, so, the fluffy fish thief seagulls understand atmospheric physics better than me. Apparently, yes. The fishermen start walking back toward the boats, already adapting their expectations for the day. The birds, meanwhile, continue their silent choreography, overhead warnings, written in wing beats, in arcs and angles, in little shifts most people would never notice, but you're noticing them now, and suddenly the sky feels different, not threatening, just awake, alive with signals you're only beginning to understand. You keep walking with the fisherman until the sea-touched air takes on a deeper chill, the kind that crawls into the threads of your clothes and makes you wonder whether you should have brought a second cloak, or maybe a small heated blanket, powered by magic, which unfortunately was not standard Viking equipment. Ahead of you, the coastline rises into a stretch of cliffs, dark, jagged, worn by centuries of waves gnawing at their base. The fishermen stop again, not because of birds this time, but because the stone itself is speaking, or whispering, or mumbling. Whatever it is, they're listening to the rocks. One of the men places his hand flat against the cliff face. You follow his lead, pressing your palm to the cold stone. It feels surprisingly alive, vibrating faintly beneath the surface, as if the ocean's pulse is traveling through it. A fisherman closes his eyes, head tilted the way you've seen people tilt their heads when they're trying to decide if a suspicious noise in their house is plumbing or a ghost with poor communication skills. His fingers trace a thin crack running diagonally down the rock. "This one's new," he murmurs. The others nod gravely. You blink. A crack? That's the sign? You squint at the cliff, trying to act like you understand what any of this means. But to you, it just looks like a rock being a rock. A mainstream historical fact drifts into the scene. Viking coastal communities used cliff acoustics and fracture changes to sense incoming storms. Moisture and pressure shifts caused echoes to change rocks. Swallowed sound differently depending on the air that wrapped around them. One fisherman taps the stone lightly with the handle of his knife. The sound it makes is odd, a low, muted thud, almost like knocking on a loaf of bread that hasn't finished baking. He frowns. "That's not right," he mutters. You tap the rock too. Your knock echoes sharper, because your technique is, frankly, terrible. The fishermen look at you like you've just committed a minor crime against geology. The old fisherman taps again, listening as if the echo contains gossip about tomorrow's fate. It's too dull. The storm's pushing damp air inland. Ah, damp air. The eternal enemy of sailors and people with curly hair. You step back and look at the whole cliff. Water trickles along the cracks. Not enough to be dramatic, but enough to suggest the stone is soaking up moisture from the wind. The same wind the birds reacted to earlier. Everything is layering into the same prediction. The weather is shifting. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some early Norse fishermen claimed that cliffs breathed before storms, exhaling cool air from within their cracks, like sleeping giants stirring. It wasn't magic. It was thermal pressure shifting inside the rock. But you have to admit, the cliffs are breathing sounds way more poetic than condensation is expanding microfractures. You lean closer to the stone. The rock isn't literally breathing, of course, but the air emerging from the cracks does feel strangely cooler than the wind itself. It's unsettling and cool, in a mildly spooky, nature knows more than you do way. Another fisherman steps forward and traces the cliffside markings with a stick. Thin lines etched by wind, vertical grooves where saltwater spray dried and carved little channels. As he studies them, his jaw tightens slightly. The spray marks are higher than yesterday. You follow his gaze. Oh, they are barely maybe the width of your thumbnail. But Vikings measured the world in subtleties that modern people ignore because we're too busy arguing about whether the forecast app is accurate within a 5% margin. A younger fisherman presses his ear to the rock, as if expecting it to speak directly. He listens a long moment, then nods to himself, satisfied. You try it too. You press your ear to the stone. It's cold. It smells like ancient sea, and probably 900 years of lichen. And then you hear something, a soft, low rumble, not from the sea, not from the wind, from inside the cliff. It vibrates faintly, like distant footsteps behind a giant wall. It doesn't feel threatening, just watchful. One fisherman catches your expression and smiles. "You hear it," he says softly. The stone answers before the sky does. Hes right. The sky still looks harmless, but the cliffs, the birds, the wind, they all agree. Tonight will not be gentle. You pull your ear away and feel slightly dizzy. The world seems louder now, not because it changed, but because you're finally hearing what the Vikings hear every day. One fisherman places a handful of pebbles at the cliff base and gently nudges them. They roll differently, depending on wind direction, moisture, and stone vibration. The little stones clatter in a way that makes the men exchange quick glances. A fisherman grimaces. That roll means the wind will snap southeast by sundown. This all feels extremely arcane to you, like the cliffs are revealing the script of the day and the fishermen are just reading along. But it's knowledge sharpened through centuries, long before weather charts existed. Historians still argue whether these observational methods were formal teachings passed through clans, or simply instincts learned through years of hardship. Some say Viking fishermen kept oral traditions about cliffs that sang differently in summer, while others insist these techniques varied wildly from region to region. But here, on this cold Nordic shoreline, the debate doesn't matter. The cliffs are murmuring, the fishermen are listening, and you are learning to hear. One of the men runs his fingers down a newly formed hairline crack. It's thin, delicate, and probably invisible to anyone not trained to look for it. He whispers. The storm is swelling the stone. You feel the unease creep in, not fear, but awareness. A shift, a pressure on the horizon you can't see yet, but can sense in the stillness. The fishermen straighten. They begin turning back toward the boats. The cliffs behind you groan softly as the temperature drops. And suddenly, you feel it too. The land is paying attention. You leave the cliffs behind, the echo of their murmurs still tucked in your ears, and follow the fishermen down toward the flatter, salt-slick stones closer to shore. The tide is shifting slow, heavy, like a giant rolling over in its sleep. A thin spray of sea mist drifts across your face, cool enough to feel like nature's version of a slap, reminding you to stay awake. As you walk, one of the older fishermen gathers a bit of the spray with his fingers, rubs it thoughtfully, then glances at you. "You taste yet?" he asks. Taste. You blink, unsure whether you misheard, or if he really expects you to. Lick the weather. But then the others nod with the seriousness of people discussing tax laws, or the correct number of blankets required for a Scandinavian winter. So yes, apparently, you are now going to taste the atmosphere. One of the fishermen scoops a bit of air near the water with his fingers, brings it to his tongue, and nods like the air has just complimented his cooking. You awkwardly mimic him, glancing around to make sure no one is laughing at you. They aren't. They're waiting. You touch your tongue to the salty moisture gathered on your fingertip. It tastes like salt. Shocking. But the fishermen seem to detect entire weather forecasts hidden inside those tiny salt crystals. One of them smacks his lips, considering the flavor the way a sommelier might evaluate a glass of wine that costs more than your rent. "Sharper today," he says. "Storm sharp." You frown. How can salt be sharp? It's already the sharpest taste known to humankind aside from regret and undercooked onions. But as you roll the taste around, you notice something subtle, an almost bitter edge. Like the salt carries a hint of minerals it usually keeps to itself. A mainstream historical fact clicks into place. Viking fishermen tasted the air to sense pressure changes, because salty mist concentrated differently when winds shifted. Lower pressure meant the sea threw more mineral-heavy droplets into the air, giving the mist a sharper flavor. So, yes, Vikings basically licked barometric pressure before barometers existed. You look at the fisherman, suddenly full of admiration and mild confusion. How did you even figure this out? You almost ask. But honestly, humans discovered fire by accident. Tasting the sky was probably just the next logical step. You keep walking as the fishermen continue sampling the air like weather-detecting sommelier sea elves. One man pinches a bit of the wind again and clicks his tongue twice. Too bitter. Wind's turning. Another squints toward the horizon and adds, tastes like early break tonight. A younger fisherman hands you a strip of dried kelp. Try again with this, he says. You blink, then take the kelp, put it against your tongue, and wait. You expect nothing, but something does happen. The kelp absorbs moisture instantly and becomes slightly rubbery. Its edges curl faster than last time you handled it. The young fisherman nods. See? Wind's pulling colder air down. Kelp stiffens differently. Oh, so now the seaweed is cooperating with the weather forecast. You're surrounded by natural instruments, cliffs that talk, birds that flee, wind that tastes like minerals, kelp that stiffens like it drank too much coffee. Suddenly, your weather app feels embarrassingly primitive. A quirky tidbit rises from memory. Some Norse families believed that if the air tasted unusually sweet, a storm spirit was nearby, testing its strength, sweetness, symbolizing the breath before a gale. Of course, modern science would claim humidity and salt concentration make that illusion, but honestly, storm spirit breath feels more fun. You sample the air again, determined to at least pretend you know what you're doing. This time, you notice the taste changes as the wind shifts across your face. The saltiness pulls briefly to the left, then becomes more muted, then returns with a sharper edge. The fishermen nod approvingly. You're learning, one says. You're not confident that's true, but you accept the compliment. Farther along the shore, a fisherman lifts a handful of wet sand, lets it drip through his fingers, and observes how it clumps. Some grains stick more than others. He grunts thoughtfully. The sand's heavy today, means the swell is changing. You crouch beside him, running your fingers through the sand. It does cling slightly more, its moisture holding tighter as if expecting trouble. The sea answers with a long, low rumble. Not quite thunder, not quite wave, something in between. It vibrates the ground just enough to make you straighten. Pressure drop. One fisherman murmurs. You suddenly realize you're surrounded by living instruments. None of them made of metal or glass. All of them made of earth, water, wind, and then something shifts. The taste of the air becomes metallic, just barely, but noticeable, almost like the scent of iron. You look at one of the fishermen immediately, and he gives a slow nod. You feel it, he says. Storms drawing breath. You swallow hard. It isn't fear, just a sense of being very, very small. A gull circles overhead, calling sharply, then drifts inland as if pulled by an invisible command. The wind strengthens, not enough to be dangerous yet, but enough for the fishermen to exchange glances. One of them runs his thumb across his teeth, tasting again, frowning. It's coming faster than expected. Another spits into the wind. The spit drifts sideways too quickly. A low muttering passes through the group. You try to follow their logic, a combination of taste, moisture, mineral sharpness, and inexplicable intuition, honed through generations. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly relied on taste as a deliberate technique, or whether it evolved from long years of unconscious observation. Some believe they had entire families trained in air tasting. Others think it was just habit, disguised as expertise. Whatever the truth, you cannot deny what you feel now. The air tastes wrong. It vibrates with too much energy, too much salt, too much something. The older fisherman puts a hand on your shoulder. "Don't fight the air," he murmurs. "Listen with your tongue. Let it tell you." You inhale deeply, gather the mist on your lips, and taste. There, beneath the salt, beneath the cold, something warm pushes upward. A strange contradiction. The signature of rising currents, meeting falling pressure. And suddenly, you know, a storm is tightening its grip far beyond the horizon. The cliffs whispered it, the birds warned it, and now the air itself has confirmed it. You look at the fishermen, they nod, and together, without a word, you turn inland. The sea behind you exhales sharply, almost like a warning. You move inland just far enough for the wind to calm, though not enough for its warnings to disappear. The fishermen lead you to a stretch of the coast where their tools rest in orderly piles, nets coiled like sleeping serpents, ropes draped across wooden posts, baskets weighted with smooth stones. Everything here feels purposeful, positioned with the kind of care you'd expect from people who treat objects not as tools, but as quiet partners. You step closer, curiosity tugging you forward, and one of the elder fishermen gestures for you to crouch. "Listen," he says, but he isn't pointing to the sea this time. He's pointing to the nets. The moment your ear tilts closer, you hear it, a faint creaking, almost a whisper, not loud enough to be eerie, just soft, like fabric shifting in its sleep. The ropes tighten, slacken, then tighten again, as if breathing. You blink. There, moving. He nods. Aye. They talk before the wind does. You lean in with renewed focus, pressing your fingertips lightly to the rope fibers. They feel damp, not merely from sea spray but from absorption, like they've pulled the air into themselves and decided to comment on it. Some strands feel taut, others spongy, as though each absorbs moisture at a different speed. A mainstream historical fact unfolds quietly in your mind. Norse fishermen often read rope tension to predict weather. The hemp or nettle fibers expanded differently when humidity rose before a storm. So yes, Vikings basically used their fishing gear as early warning barometers. You run your hand along one thick rope, noticing how the strands feel uneven, soft in one place, rigid in another. The elder fisherman lifts the rope slightly, letting it stretch between his hands. It responds sluggishly, too slow for normal morning humidity. "Feel that heaviness?" he says. "That's storm wet. Not rain wet. Storm wet. Storm wet." Apparently, ropes have an entire vocabulary, and you are still learning the alphabet. Nearby, another fisherman lifts a narrow net. When he pulls it taut, the fibers make a faint twanging sound, sharp, high, like a plucked string. He frowns. "Too tight," he mutters, winds shifting north. Another fisherman compares his own net, stretching it sideways. The fibers sag, bowing like tired shoulders. He glances at the others. Mine's going slack already. You watch them trade, looks like surgeons diagnosing a patient with a very dramatic cough. They tug at ropes, tap knots, hold nets up to the light, listening to the way the wind passes through them. Each sound carries meaning, and you're kneeling beside them, pretending you understand even 10% of what's going on. One fisherman hands you a net, motioning for you to stretch it. You grip the corners and pull. At first, nothing seems unusual. Then you hear a faint tremor, a trembling vibration that shivers through the fibers. "There," he says. "Hear that?" You nod, unsure if you truly heard it or if you just wanted to be polite. He chuckles. "Don't worry. Took me years to hear the difference between wind in an hour and wind in a heartbeat." You smile, partly relieved, partly terrified at the idea that nets have heartbeats. As you keep working the nets between your hands, a quirky historical tidbit pops up. Some Viking villages believed nets could whisper before storms because sea spirits tugged at the ropes to warn fishermen. This belief became so common that families hung small nets above doorways to hear tiny creaks as omens. You imagine your own apartment door decorated with a storm-whispering net and can't help chuckling. Amazon definitely doesn't carry that model. You continue examining the nets. Certain knots look darker wetness gathering in their cores. Certain rings of woven fiber feel swollen. A fisherman points out how the wooden floats along the net's edge shift gently when dampness increases in the air. He taps one of the floats. A soft thud. Then he taps another. A slightly sharper, lighter knock. Dry wood, wet wood, he explains. Storm moves water into everything before it moves into the sky. You open your mouth to comment, but the wind cuts you off just a small breath, but sharp enough for every fisherman to straighten. They listen. You listen. The nets rustle again, quicker this time. The ropes tighten like sinews preparing for motion. Something in the air thickens, not visible, not loud, but present. Pressure drop. One of them murmurs, faster than before. You run a finger along a rope again. It almost hums. A strange, soft vibration moves through it, traveling from fiber to fiber, like a quiet message. You swallow. It's humming? The elder fisherman nods. Aye, means the wind is close now. The nets begin to sway without being touched. The floats rattle. A few knots tighten themselves visibly, shrinking with moisture, contracting like tiny muscles pulling toward the center. One fisherman lifts a rope completely off the post. The rope hangs heavy, the weight wrong for normal weather. Feels like midsummer storms, he mutters. But it's far too cold for that. Historians still argue whether Norse rope reading was intentional science or simply instinct refined through generations of necessity. Some scholars say fishermen exaggerated the method, others insist the technique was highly advanced, an early tactile form of meteorology. Watching the ropes now, you understand why the debate even exists. These fibers seem alive, responding to weather in ways no modern instrument could replicate without batteries and a user manual. You continue to test a net as the fishermen prepare their gear for safety rather than sailing. One pulls his net down entirely, folding it in a practiced motion. Another checks knots with quick efficiency. The younger fisherman ties an extra securing rope around the posts. The wind shifts again. The nets respond instantly, twisting slightly, vibrating like plucked nerves. The elder fisherman gives you a steady look. You hear it now, don't you? You do. A faint rhythm, a pattern, a quiet urgency. Yes, you say softly. It sounds worried. He grins. Then you're learning faster than I did. That should feel flattering. But the nets whisper again in that tightening, trembling way. And you realize the sea is no longer hinting at the storm. It's calling it. One last rope sings in the wind. A thin, high note that carries farther than expected. The fishermen look at one another. It's time, one says. Aye, another agrees. They gather their tools quickly, efficient and calm, and motion for you to stand. You take one final glance at the nets and ropes their fibers quivering like nervous animals before sheltering, and realize that every whisper you heard was a warning you almost missed. And now, the storm is no longer distant. It's coming. You follow the fishermen inland, only a few steps before they stop again. This time, not to watch the sea, not to taste the air, not to listen to their nets, but to raise their faces toward the dimming sky. Evening is settling over the coast in a soft wash of indigo, and the first stars begin to appear like tiny pinpricks through a blanket someone forgot to finish weaving. The fishermen slow, almost reverent, the way some people step into cathedrals. Here, their cathedral is the sky. One of them leans close and murmurs, "Now the real map shows itself." You tilt your head back. The stars look perfectly normal, which is to say, pretty, a little wobbly if you stare too hard, and absolutely not like a weather report. But the men around you narrow their eyes with the focus of people trying to read the smallest font ever printed on the back of a cereal box. "Watch," the eldest whispers, pointing at a cluster low in the sky. You squint. The stars flicker. Stars always flicker. Congratulations, you have seen astronomy. But then one of the fishermen shakes his head. "Too soft," he says. "Too blurred." Blurred? How can something millions of miles away blur unless you forgot to clean your glasses, which, to be fair, you did not bring to the Viking Age? A mainstream historical fact clicks into your mind. Norse sailors and fishermen used star clarity as a crude pressure indicator. When air pressure dropped sharply before storms, moisture thickened the atmosphere enough to distort starlight, making constellations shimmer differently, almost as if the sky were breathing unevenly. You stare harder, and yes, the stars wobble a little more than before, like their light is passing through a lens smeared with thin mist. A young fisherman folds his arms, feels like east wind pressing from behind. Another murmurs, and clouds forming where we can't see them yet. One kneels and draws a rough shape in the dirt, an uneven curve, meant to show how star brightness changes when a storm's upper structure approaches. You look at it and nod with enthusiasm, despite having zero idea what you're agreeing with. Then something subtle shifts. The stars near the horizon dim all at once, barely a breath's difference, but enough for the fisherman to stiffen. "There," the elder says. You wait. Nothing else happens. He points again. "Look harder." You do. And slowly, finally, you see it. A slight wavering, like someone dragging a thin veil across the sky. Not cloud, not fog, just distortion. This faint ripple is enough to make the fishermen murmur collectively. "Storm edge," one says. "Warm air rising fast," another adds. "Cold layer collapsing," the eldest finishes. You feel oddly proud of them, like watching your friends flex a superpower you absolutely do not possess. A quirky historical tidbit pops up in your memory. Some Viking families believed that when stars flickered too intensely on the horizon, it meant ancient spirits were hammering the sky, forging the winds that would arrive the next morning. Children were told to go inside so the spirits wouldn't mistake them for runaway embers. You kind of wish someone had warned you too. As the last light drains from the coast, the fishermen lead you farther up the hill to get a better view. The stars above are bright and sharp, but those near the horizon pulse strangely, bending in and out of shape like small lanterns caught behind rippling water. "Pressure's falling faster now," one man mutters. Seas pulling warm breath from the south. The elder lifts a finger as if testing the temperature, but he isn't testing warmth. Hez feeling how the air moves. Even the smallest change in wind height can alter how the stars seem to tremble. You imitate him, lifting your hand. You feel nothing but a barely noticeable shiver of breeze. The elder nods. "Good." You feel the thinness. "Thinness?" He taps your wrist lightly. Air becomes lighter before heavy storms. Thinner wind makes the stars dance more. Dance. That's a poetic way to describe something that is making you feel slightly nauseous. You wipe your palms on your clothes as the fishermen move again, this time to sit on a large flat rock polished by years of weather and waiting. They settle like monks preparing for meditation. The youngest gestures for you to join them. You sit awkwardly, knees cracking louder than you hoped. They ignore it politely, which somehow makes the embarrassment worse. One fisherman points at a star near the horizon. That one is bending too much. You watch it. It bends, then straightens, then blurs again. Another says, "Means wind is stacking, layers shifting, might break early." You are 99% sure they're reading the emotional state of the cosmos. The elder exhales slowly. Storm before dawn. A quiet hush falls. The idea of a storm didn't scare you before, But now, with the nets trembling, the air sharpening, the birds leaving, and the stars flickering like stressed-out fireflies, it feels different, more real, more alive. You look again at the sky. The stars above remain sharp, but the horizon shivers like a thin piece of glass tapped by invisible fingers. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly interpreted starlight distortions with any consistency, or whether they simply combined intuition with countless nights spent outdoors. Some claim it was observational science. Others say it was superstition woven with truth. Watching the fisherman now, it feels like both. The elder stands, offering his hand to help you up. His grip is firm, weathered, warm. "The stars have told enough for tonight," he says softly. You descend the hill with them, the sky pulsing faintly behind you, the world feeling strangely heavier despite the thinning wind. As you reach the shore again, a gust sweeps across the rocks. Not strong, not violent, but purposeful. The kind of wind that says, "Get ready." You walk inland with the fishermen, their boots thudding softly against the packed earth. But before you get far, one of them stops, his hand lifted, palm open, like he's listening to something you can't quite hear. The others fall silent instantly. Even the wind slows, as though it, too, has turned its head. Then the fisherman points toward a narrow, rocky path, winding between two low hills. "We check the ice," he says. "Ice?" You blink at him, because it's not winter, and you don't exactly see glaciers lying around waiting to be interviewed. But the group turns down the path without hesitation, so you follow, trying not to slip on the damp stones. The trail leads to a shallow inlet, where seawater gathers in small pools between rocks. The cold here feels sharper, the kind that bites the bones rather than the skin. And there, spread across the surfaces of the pools, float thin sheets of briny ice, translucent as frosted glass. One fisherman kneels beside the nearest pool and taps the ice lightly with the tip of a bone knife. It answers, not with a clean crack, not with a shatter, but with a whispering ripple, a shimmering vibration under the surface, like a quiet hum made of cold. "That's wrong," he says. You crouch beside him, trying to hear what he just heard. He taps again. This time, you catch it, a faint crackle, almost like the sound of crumpling parchment. Another fisherman kneels at a different pool. He presses his thumb against the ice and waits. After a moment, the sheet emits a soft, popping sound. "Too soft," he mutters. A younger fisherman dips his fingers into a separate pool, lifts a thin edge of ice, and snaps it. The break is not crisp. It bends before splitting, almost like leather. "That's warm wind," he says grimly. Warm wind pushing into cold water. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. Norse fishermen used sea ice as a kind of barometer. The density, tone, and brittleness of coastal ice changed depending on incoming wind direction and air pressure. A warm front made the ice buckle and whisper long before the sky changed. Which means this ice, this soft, crackling, uneasy ice isn't just frozen water. It's a warning. You watch the fishermen move from pool to pool, touching, tapping, listening. Some pieces of ice crack like eggshells, others bend like wax. Some emit a faint fizzing sound, like distant boiling. One fisherman lifts a triangular shard of ice to the moonlight. Tiny bubbles trapped inside shift and dance with the temperature. "See that?" he says. "Bubbles moving too quick means a push of warm air from the south." You nod, even though you're mostly watching because it seems rude not to. Then something unusual happens. A fisherman takes a shard of ice between his fingers, brings it to his ear, and holds perfectly still. After a moment, he lowers it and says, "Wind lifting, pressure falling." You stare at him, Hes literally listening to the ice. He notices your confusion and shrugs. Ice speaks louder than clouds, if you know how to hear it. Another fisherman cracks a thin sheet between his hands. Instead of breaking loudly, it peels apart, curling like old bark. He frowns. Too much curl. Warm air rising. You feel the tension building beneath their quiet assessments. No panic, just precision, like carpenters checking joints before a storm tears the roof off. A quirky tidbit you once read resurfaces. Some Scandinavian fishing families believed crackling ice wasn't just a temperature shift, but the gossip of the sea, the ocean whispering secrets about storms forming far beyond human sight. Standing here, watching these men listen to frozen puddles like they're ancient storytellers, you start to understand why that belief stuck. One fisherman picks up a thick chunk of ice from the farthest pool. It's smooth, heavy, and opaque. Nothing like the fragile sheets near the shore. He drops it onto a flat stone. Thunk. The sound is dense, almost wooden. Everyone goes quiet. That's the one, the elder fisherman murmurs. You tilt your head. The one. What? He looks at you, eyes narrowing in that way people do when they're measuring how much you'll understand. When the thick ice sounds hollow, he says, a warm gale is already moving. Might be hours, might be minutes. You swallow. The air suddenly seems thinner. Another fisherman, kneeling beside a shallow pool, presses his palm flat against a trembling sheet of ice. It's breathing, he whispers, and it is. The ice gently pulses under his hand, expanding and contracting as if inhaling. You lean closer, and you can feel it. Tiny shifts, subtle warming, the slow release of trapped air. The ice is alive with tension. Storms tightening. Someone mutters. You stand, looking across the pools scattered between rocks. Each one holds a slightly different message. The crackle of unstable air, the bend of warm currents, the hollow thud of shifting pressure, the trembling pulse of rising wind. Together, they paint a picture more vivid than any weather report. Your chest grows tight, not with fear, but with awe. How many generations stood exactly where you're standing, reading these tiny signals long before satellites, ships, or instruments existed? You turn to one fisherman. How do you know all this? He shrugs, brushing frost from his beard. Because if we didn't, he says plainly, we died. Fair. Very fair. The group begins gathering their tools, moving with quiet urgency. Not frantic, just efficient. One packs the fish crates, another ties down supplies, another checks the rope lines. They don't need thunder. They don't need lightning. The ice has already spoken. And then, as you begin following them back toward the path, the wind shifts suddenly, sharply. The pools tremble. A ripple cuts across one sheet of ice so cleanly, it looks like a blade sliced it. Every fisherman stops. The elder turns his face to the darkening horizon. It's close. You don't ask how he knows. You don't need to. The ice beneath you has been whispering for the last 10 minutes, and now the wind has finally agreed. You follow them back toward higher ground, the sound of crackling ice fading behind you like the last lines of a warning you were lucky enough to overhear. The storm is no longer a rumor. It's coming. You head back inland with the fishermen, leaving the restless shoreline behind as the sky begins shifting into the deepening blues of early evening. The long stretch of coastline fades into a silhouette of wet rocks and scattered fishing gear. But the men are not done teaching you, not even close. Because if morning belongs to the sea, then evening belongs to every creature that lives in it. As you follow the muddy footpath toward a quiet inlet, one of the older fishermen gestures for you to slow down and listen. Not to the wind this time, not to the waves, but to the animals. They know before we know, he murmurs. At first, you don't hear anything unusual, just the steady lap of water and the faint creak of boats settling against their moorings. But then the fishermen point toward a cluster of rocks where several seals rest in a loose pile of blubbery contentment. Except they're not resting. They lift their heads in unison, sniffing the wind as if reading invisible messages threaded through the air. One seal lets out a low, uneasy groan. Another shifts its position, edging farther inland. A third splashes into the water with an urgency that sends droplets spraying in a sharp arc. The fishermen exchange glances. "Storm sense," one mutters. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Coastal animal behavior, especially seals, was used by Norse communities as an early warning system. Seals reacted to pressure changes and shifting currents long before humans could perceive them. You watch the seals move, their slick bodies cutting through the water as if they're in a hurry to be anywhere but here. Even the lazy ones, the ones who look like sentient puddles, move with purpose now. Beyond them, seabirds wheel overhead. Gulls, usually chaotic and loud enough to qualify as natural disasters with feathers, now fly in tight, disciplined spirals. They aren't calling. They aren't fighting over fish scraps. They're simply watching the horizon. One fisherman shades his eyes with a hand. "Birds tightening their circle," he says, "means heavy wind on the way." You tilt your head, noticing how the flock shifts in a way you never would have interpreted as meaningful. But here, nothing is random. Everything is a sign. A lone puffin waddles across the rocks, looks around suspiciously, and actually turns back toward its burrow instead of fishing. You've never related to an animal more in your life. One of the fishermen laughs when he sees your expression. Aye, even the puffins know when to stay home. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Norse villages believed puffins carried the spirits of drowned sailors, and that when puffins stayed close to land, it meant the ocean was restless, with old memories, warning the living to tread carefully. You're not sure whether that's folklore or emotional support bird behavior, but the effect is the same. The puffins retreat, the gulls swirl inward, the seals vanish beneath the waves, and then you notice the cod. Buckets left near the boats hold the day's catch, but the fish inside are moving strangely, not frantic, not still, just twitching in slow, rhythmic pulses, as if responding to a distant vibration. A fisherman crouches beside one bucket, studying the fish closely. "Feel that?" he says. You crouch too. Place your hand against the wooden rim, and there it is. A faint tremor passing through the fish, like a shiver from the deep. Water's changing, he continues. Pressure's dropping. They feel it through their bones. You look at your own hands, and imagine if humans could sense weather through their skeletons. Honestly, given how your knees behave every time it rains, maybe you're not so different. Farther up the path, a cluster of gulls suddenly lands near the fishing sheds. Not to nest, not to scavenge, just to gather, quietly, watchfully, like a feathery emergency meeting. One fisherman nudges you gently. When the noisy ones go silent, that's when you listen hardest. You nod, trying to absorb every detail. The seals moving inland, the puffins refusing the sea, the cod trembling in their buckets, the gulls sitting in unnaturally tight formation. It feels like the world is drawing in a deep breath before something shifts. But the fishermen want you to see one more thing. They lead you toward a narrow trench where tide pools linger, even at low water. Usually, these small pools swarm with life, tiny shrimp, darting fish, squishy things you hope are harmless. But tonight, the pools look strangely still. You peer into the glassy surface. The shrimp cling to rocks instead of swimming. The snails have retreated deep into their shells. Even the seaweed floats lower, its fronds sagging like wet cloth. It's the calm that animals fear, one fisherman whispers, not the storm itself. You straighten slowly, a cold ribbon of realization sliding down your spine. Everything around you is bracing. Even the air feels thicker. as if preparing to be pushed. Historians still argue whether Vikings interpreted animal behavior scientifically or spiritually. Some believed animals sensed pressure and chemical changes in the air. Others believed creatures received warnings from sea spirits or ancient gods. The truth probably blends both the science beneath the myth shaping the science. But right now, you don't need books or theories. You can feel it. The seals have vanished into deep water. The birds have gathered in, muttering silence. The cod tremble like tuning forks. The tide pools hold their breath. The sea is speaking, not with waves or wind, but through its creatures. The fishermen fall quiet, each one absorbing the signs in his own way. The youngest swallows hard, eyes skimming the horizon. The elder simply nods, a slow, resigned motion. "It will be a long night," he murmurs. You follow their gaze out to the darkening water. The horizon, once calm, now seems uneven, like something massive is shifting behind it. A faint chill curls around your neck. You suddenly understand why Vikings trusted animals more than instruments. Nature doesn't lie. Nature doesn't hesitate. Nature whispers the truth long before humans are ready to hear it. And tonight, that truth is clear. Something is coming, something big, something the animals already fear. One fisherman claps you gently on the shoulder. "Stay close," he says softly, "and watch the creatures. They'll tell you what the storm wants." You nod, heart steady, but awake in a deeper way than before. Because now you're listening not to the weather, but to the world beneath it. You follow the fisherman back toward the cluster of timber houses at the edge of the harbor, where the last colors of daylight melt into a bruised violet sky. The wind has softened for now, settling into a cautious pause, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Lanterns begin flickering awake one by one, their warm glow bouncing off damp wooden walls and braided rope fences. You hear chatter, low and steady, a village going through its nightly rituals, each family preparing for the long hours ahead. But tonight feels different. Not dangerous yet, just charged, like the hush before someone whispers a secret into your ear. The fishermen gesture for you to follow them toward the docks where a handful of villagers have gathered, trading murmured updates about the sky and sea. You hear fragments. Birds flew inland too early today. The tide rose wrong, too smooth, too quiet. Smelled iron in the wind. Your senses are still buzzing from everything you witnessed earlier, but now you're stepping into the heart of the village's collective weather. Wisdom, part science, part superstition, part something else entirely. A woman with long, salt-stiff braids waves you over. She's older than the fisherman, but her eyes are sharp, alert, filled with the kind of confidence only someone who has survived a lifetime of storms can carry. She holds a bowl of herbs in one hand and a tiny bone charm in the other. "Evening signs," she says simply, nodding toward the bowl. Inside are sprigs of dried angelica, wild thyme, and something that smells unmistakably like smoke. She stirs the mix gently with her fingers, then sprinkles a pinch over a small brazier. Thin trails of smoke rise into the air, curling like pale snakes. The fisherman stands silently as she watches how the smoke behaves. "It bends too quickly," she mutters, winds shifting before moonrise. You watch the smoke too, but all you see is smoke being smoke. These villagers, though, read it like handwriting. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Norse coastal communities burned herbs at dusk and observed the smoke to detect subtle shifts in air pressure or incoming gusts. Even tiny changes in airflow could mean the difference between a safe voyage and a disastrous night. The woman turns to you and offers a handful of herbs. "Smell," she commands. You sniff. The scent is warm, earthy, a little bitter. Nothing alarming, but she shakes her head. Not what it smells like, what it reminds you of. You blink, You want to say it reminds you of tea your grandmother once brewed when you were sick, but that feels unhelpful. Instead, you inhale again, slower this time, and suddenly there's a faint metallic tingling behind the scent, something you wouldn't have noticed without her prompting. She nods. Rain riding with the wind. You're still amazed that a smell you barely detected could signal the arrival of a weather shift. Nearby, a pair of men sit on overturned barrels, carving small wooden tokens, fish shapes, spirals, crude little boats. They hang them along the eaves of the boathouse and wait. Each token sways with the breeze, tapping softly against the walls. You tilt your head. The rhythm is uneven. That's wrong, one carver mutters, listening carefully. Too heavy on the east side. The other agrees. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Viking villagers believed wooden charms carved at dusk acted as wind ears, revealing direction changes through their tapping sounds. It wasn't magic, just clever sound reading, but people talked about them as if they had personalities. You glance at the fishermen. They're watching the charms too. One of the older men whispers, "Wind's hiding something." Your skin prickles. A little farther up the dock, several women gather near a large cauldron, stirring seawater mixed with ash and herbs. You assume it's for cooking until one of them dips a ladle in and pours the mixture slowly onto the wooden planks. They watch how it flows. You raise your eyebrows involuntarily. One of the women laughs softly. "Yes, child. The sea tells us in more ways than you think." The mixture creeps to the left in a thin ribbon, slower than water should. "Wind is pushing from the southeast already," she says. "Earlier than expected," another answers, frowning. The fishermen exchange glances. You hear the soft tightening of breath around you. The village is reading signs everywhere in smoke, scent, noise, liquid, movement. It feels like everyone's senses are tuned to a frequency you're only beginning to access. You wander with the fishermen toward the far edge of the harbor, where lanterns glow dimly against the deepening blue. The elder fisherman stands still, eyes scanning the horizon. "Feel that?" he asks quietly. You close your eyes. The air has cooled just slightly. Not enough to be dramatic, just a subtle dip, like a cold fingertip brushing the back of your neck. "It's the sea drawing breath before it exerts itself," he says. Historians still argue whether Viking weather reading relied more on natural observation or on rooted ritual practices that gave sailors a sense of control over the unknown. Some believe these rituals were symbolic comfort. Others argue they were empirical methods wrapped in myth. Standing here, you suspect it was both. The rituals didn't just explain the world. They prepared people to notice it. A young girl passes by carrying a bundle of dried reeds and hangs them under an awning. You watch as she lightly taps them to release the dust. The dust floats strangely first up, then sideways, then sinks faster than it should. She widens her eyes. The spirits are restless tonight. A fisherman pats her head. "Not spirits, child. Just pressure." "Pressure is a spirit," she insists. You want to laugh, but part of you wonders if she might be right in a poetic way. The elder leads you to a stone bench overlooking the water. "Night will tell us the rest," he says. You sit beside him as more villagers gather, some bringing lanterns, some knitting nets, others simply watching the horizon darken. The conversations lower to murmurs. Every small sound becomes important. The creak of a rope, the tap of charms, the soft whine of wind through dried herbs. You watch the first star appear above the horizon, but it flickers oddly. The elder murmurs, "Look again." You focus. The flicker isn't normal. It wavers as if something invisible is warping the air. "A distortion," he explains softly. "Wind rising where it shouldn't." Your pulse thumps once, not fear, but recognition. The signs are aligning. Animals acted strangely. The air tasted wrong. The kelp stiffened. The sand clung. The smoke bent. The charms tapped unevenly. The seawater ribbon drifted sideways, and now even the stars are behaving strangely. You exhale slowly. The village isn't scared. They're preparing. Rituals continue. Soft chants, gentle gestures, offerings of herbs placed near thresholds. Some practices feel old, older than memory. Others look purely practical, tying down boats, securing nets, stacking barrels. You watch, absorbing every motion. Tonight, superstition and science walk hand in hand like two old friends who've stopped arguing about who's right. The elder stands, stretches his back, and gives you a nod. "You're learning," he says, and strangely, you feel the truth of it. You're beginning to understand a world where whispers carry weight, where signs live in every corner of the environment, and where the evening rituals of a Viking harbor are as much a language as they are a tradition. The villagers settle into the dusk, lanterns glowing like soft constellations on the ground, and above you the real constellations tremble just slightly, just enough to say, the storm is nearer. You walk beside the fishermen as they lead you toward the farthest edge of the harbor, where the houses thin out, where the shore stretches into a darker horizon, and where the oldest men of the village keep their quiet watch. The air around you feels heavier now, as if the sky is lowering itself inch by inch. Even the gulls seem to sense it. They perch silently on roof beams, instead of screaming their usual commentary about everything and nothing. One fisherman gestures toward a cluster of weathered benches, set beneath an awning of driftwood and whale ribs. There, sitting like carved figures in a saga, are the elder weatherseers, the ones the entire village listens to without question. They turn slowly as you approach, their eyes sharp even in the dim light. These are not men who guess the weather. These are men who remember the weather, who have lived through storms that nearly rewrote the shoreline. One of them beckons you closer with 2 fingers. His hands are knotted with age, but his movements are steady, deliberate. When you sit beside him, you notice the faint smell of pine resin clinging to his cloak. He looks at the sea, not at you, and begins to speak in a low, even voice. "You felt it all day," he says. "The signs, the changes, but there are things you can't see, yes? Things you can only sense." You nod, though you aren't entirely sure you understand. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Old Norse communities often relied on elder fishermen, who were respected not just for age, but for an almost instinctive ability to interpret weather shifts. Some called them storm readers, others wind watchers. This man, sitting beside you with eyes like cold embers, is clearly one of them. He raises one hand and lets the wind pass across his palm. "What does it say to you?" he asks. You hesitate. The wind feels conflicted, cold at first, but carrying a thin thread of warmth beneath it, like 2 tides wrestling for dominance. "It feels like it's unsure," you say. The elder smiles faintly. "Good. You're beginning to listen." He points toward the water. "Watch the edge of the waves." You squint at the surf. The foam spreads differently now, thinner, pulled outward instead of curling inward toward the shore. The elder continues. The sea is retreating in its breath. When the foam runs thin, the storm is thickening. Another elder taps his ear. "Listen." You do. At first, all you hear is distant water and murmuring wind. But then, just barely, you hear a strange hollow whistle beneath the gusts. Quiet, quick, almost shy. "That," the elder says, "is the voice of warm air slipping under cold." A storm's first argument. One of the women who has joined the group adds, "The gulls heard it long before we did. They flew inland. They always do." A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some Viking villages believed gulls carried messages from sea spirits, warning fishermen of danger. In reality, The gulls simply reacted to pressure drops and shifting currents, but the myth stuck because it worked. You listen harder now. The wind whistles again, longer this time, threading through the harbor posts, like the breath of something creeping closer. The elder nods. There, now the storm has found its voice. He turns toward you fully for the first time. Tell me, he asks, what did the rocks say today? You blink, surprised he even knows you were at the cliffs earlier. You answer softly. They echoed differently. The sound went deeper. He hums in approval. Hollow echoes. That means the air above the sea is thinning. Storm weight is pushing it away. Another elder leans forward, eyes narrowing as he studies your face. And what did the air taste like before sunset? You think back, sharp as salt, a metallic thread, the hint of bitterness. It tasted wrong, you say. That is the taste of pressure falling, he replies, long before clouds form. Historians still argue whether Viking storm readers truly understood the science behind pressure systems, or relied mostly on intuition built from years of experience. Some insist they had a practical understanding of weather patterns, far more advanced than anyone expected. Others believe their knowledge was wrapped in superstition and myth, making it impossible to separate truth from tradition. Standing here now, listening to the elders interpret the world with nothing but their senses, you feel the debate fading into irrelevance. Whatever they knew, it worked. One elder rises slowly, joints cracking like old wood. He picks up a handful of dried grass from the ground and releases it into the wind. The grass scatters unevenly, some strands spiraling downward faster than others. That, he says, is wind confusion. The higher currents are arguing. He motions for you to try. You grab a few strands, toss them upward, and watch as they hesitate just for a heartbeat before splintering in opposite directions. The elders all murmur at once. Stormbringer wins. Too soon. It will hit before dawn. A nervous energy spreads through the group like an exhale held too long. The elder beside you rests a steady hand on your back. Do you feel the pressure in your bones? He asks. You pause. You do feel something deep in your chest, like the air is thicker around your ribs, the weight of the sky pressing a little harder. He nods. Your body always knows before your mind does. The wind shifts again, stronger now, curling around your ankles. Lanterns flicker. The sea darkens. The horizon disappears as clouds gather in a slow, creeping wall. The elders rise together, moving with coordinated purpose. One retrieves a carved horn. One checks the boat's moorings. One begins muttering instructions to a young fisherman. They are preparing not with panic, but with respect. You stand there as the sky thickens, feeling something ancient and humbling settle over the harbor. The elders glance at you one last time, each giving a small nod, not approval, not pride, but acknowledgement. You have listened, and now you can hear the storm the way they do before it arrives, before it roars, while it is still a whisper at the edge of the world. The elders' final words drift to you like a closing line in an old saga. Tonight, the sea will speak loudly, but remember, its first language is always quiet. You step back onto the shoreline just as the last rim of sunlight melts into the sea, leaving behind a dusky band of deep blue that feels heavier than the air you've been breathing all day. The fishermen move slower now, their motions deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if the fading light itself is a warning they've learned to respect. A thin, metallic chill brushes across your face, nudging you like a cold finger tapping your cheek. You look toward the horizon, no obvious storm clouds, no thunderheads, nothing dramatic. Yet the world feels tilted, leaning, anticipating. The oldest fisherman, the one who can read weather from a single grain of sand, steps beside you and squints hard enough to make you check whether he's trying to see the future or intimidate the ocean into confessing its plans. "The night's too quiet," he murmurs. And it is quiet. The kind of quiet that presses into your ears, muting even your own breath. Somewhere behind you, the village dogs have stopped barking. The gulls have gone inland. The wind hasn't died, it's simply waiting, gathering itself. A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind. Viking seafarers understood that the most dangerous storms often arrived after unnatural stillness, what later sailors called the devil's pause. Silence wasn't peace. Silence was a loaded crossbow. You inhale deeply. Even the air feels dense, thicker than before, as if the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. A fisherman to your left runs his fingers over a rope coil, checks the weight of a net, listens to how the fibers shift. Another taps the wooden hull of a boat lightly, listening to the vibration. Their movements aren't frantic. They're the slow, focused motions of people who have lived through nights like this and prefer not to repeat certain mistakes. You feel your heartbeats synchronize with their tension. The older fisherman gestures for you to follow him down to the waterline. The sea looks strangely flat. Its surface is too smooth, like someone ironed it. You crouch beside him, your boots sinking slightly into the damp sand. He picks up a small driftwood stick and gently lays it on the edge of the water. You wait. The stick should sway with the small lap of the tide, but it doesn't. It twitches, then goes still again. "Water's confused," he mutters. You almost laugh. Confused? But then you realize it's true, the tide is pulling and pushing at the same time. Like two invisible forces are arguing beneath the surface. The waves are too slow, too heavy. A younger fisherman joins you, pointing up at the sky. The clouds, if you can call them clouds, look like thin smears of pale silver, stretched too far apart. Walls without roofs. They barely move. "High winds above," the young one says. "They haven't touched us yet." Another man throws a handful of sand into the air. Instead of scattering, it drifts sideways in a long, eerie arc. Your skin prickles. The older fisherman exhales through his nose, the Viking equivalent of muttering, "Well, that's not good." A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind, one that feels too strange to be true but somehow fits this moment. Some Norse families believed that a storm spirit prowled the coastline the night before striking, checking which homes lit fires, which people whispered, which children cried. To avoid attracting the spirit's interest, families would keep their voices low and their doorways clear of clutter. Looking around now, you notice something else. The fishermen aren't yelling to each other anymore. Their loud laughs from earlier have softened into murmurs. Even the clatter of tools sounds subdued, like the entire shoreline is following an unspoken rule. The older fisherman leads you to a cluster of boats pulled up onto the sand. He touches each hull like greeting an old friend, checking for cracks, feeling the grain of the wood, nudging the keel with his boot. The boats creak faintly, responding the way living creatures do when approached by someone they trust. The fishermen begin weighing their options. Should they push out at dawn? Wait? Pull the boats further inland? They talk in low voices, heads bowed, shoulders bent slightly inward as though bracing for the wind that hasn't arrived yet. Historians still argue whether Viking weather predictions were truly accurate or mostly lucky guesses refined by experience. Some scholars insist their methods bordered on superstition. Others believe deeply in the sophisticated sensory system developed by generations who lived face to face with the North Sea's moods. Watching these men now, listening to wood vibrations, reading sky smears, feeling air pressure with their bones, you're starting to think the scholars might be underestimating something. A fisherman hands you a lantern and gestures toward the outermost boat. You walk with him, holding the lantern low so its warm glow spills under the hull. He checks the boat's keel and mutters something about swell angles, shifting too fast. You try to hear what he hears, see what he sees, but everything looks mundane to your untrained eyes. Until a new sound reaches you, a faint hum so low you almost miss it vibrating through the sand beneath your boots. You freeze. The fisherman beside you nods slowly, jaw tightening. "You feel that?" he says. Not a question. You nod back. It feels like the sea is whispering through the ground, a quiet tremor of something turning in the distance. Not an earthquake, not thunder, something else, something moving fast. He steps closer to the water. You follow. The shoreline suddenly exhales, a welcome breeze, gentle, cool, soft enough that you could convince yourself it's harmless. And then the breeze stops. The air grows warm, too warm. A fisherman behind you says, "There, that's the last warning." You look out at the horizon. The sky is darkening in a way that doesn't match the time of night. Darkness moving like ink in water, swallowing stars at the edges. The fishermen exchange glances rich with meaning, with memory, with survival instincts older than their language. "No boats out tomorrow," the elder says finally. "It'll break before sunrise." The decision settles over the group like a net falling into place. The men nod, relieved even as unease ripples through them. One of them looks at you. "Storms don't always show teeth before they bite," he says softly. The group begins pulling loose nets out of the open air, anchoring tools, tying down anything the wind might claim. You help stack crates and coil ropes. Your hands move quickly, your breath quickening despite your best attempts to stay calm. The older fisherman pauses beside you, placing a hand on your shoulder. "Tonight, you don't fight the gale," he says. "You respect it." The shoreline grows darker, the lanterns flicker. The first genuine gust rolls over the water low, heavy, whispering a promise you can feel deep in your ribs. You turn inland with the fisherman. Behind you, the sea inhales sharply. The storm has begun its approach. You follow the fishermen as they move toward the shoreline with a pace that's no longer casual. It's not panic. Vikings never did panic. They simply adjusted quickly, but the rhythm of their feet tells you everything you need to know. Something is shifting out there in the dark. Something the sea has been hinting at all day. Something the cliffs, the birds, and even the air tried to warn you about. You step onto the packed sand, and the first thing you notice is the wind. It isn't strong, but it carries intention like a messenger running ahead of a larger force. It darts across your cheeks, cold and precise, and seems to whisper, "Hurry." The fishermen begin checking their boats. The longships sit in shallow water, rocking gently, but the sound of that rocking feels offbeat, irregular, a little too quick, a little too sharp, like the sea is tapping its fingers in growing impatience. One man runs his palm along the hull, nodding at the tension in the wood. Another lifts a handful of kelp from the shore, twists it, and watches how the strands cling together. A third lifts his face to the sky as if reading something written on the darkness itself. You stay close, your senses on high alert. A mainstream historical fact rises naturally. Viking fishermen often trusted the night signs more than daytime omens. They believed dangerous weather revealed itself most honestly after the sun set, when distractions faded and the world grew quiet enough to hear the sea think. Tonight is exactly one of those nights. A fisherman gestures toward the long horizon, now a heavy blur of steel-grey shadows. "See the line?" he asks. You squint. At first, you see nothing, but then you notice it. A faint boundary, where the darkness changes texture, like fabric being pulled in two directions. "That's wind on the move," he explains. "Too fast for night." You feel it, your stomach tightens. Subtle, but real. The men begin tightening ropes, looping knots with practiced speed. Wet fibers slap against wood with a rhythm that reminds you of the whispering nets earlier. Except now, the whispers have urgency. Then something unexpected happens. The waves begin to glow, not brightly, just a soft, ghostly shimmer as foam breaks along the beach. It's the bioluminescence you've heard about but never seen in person. Tiny sea organisms lighting up every time the water is disturbed. Normally, it's beautiful, magical, even. But tonight, it looks like warning lights blinking underwater. A quirky fact bubbles up from your memory. Some Norse villagers believed glowing waves meant the sea spirits were running their fingers through the water, checking the surface before sending strong winds. Modern science would just call it plankton reacting to movement. But honestly, the Viking version fits the moment better. You take another step toward the shore, and that's when you hear it. A deep thud, far offshore. Not thunder, not a rock fall, something heavier. A rolling sound beneath the water, too low to be anything but the pulse of a shifting sea. The oldest fisherman freezes mid-knot. That, he mutters, is the bed of the sea changing. You blink. Like, moving? He nods once. Pressure. Big wind pushing from the south. You suddenly wish you had some scientific instrument. Any instrument. But all you have is your nervous system, which now feels like a tuning fork hit by a giant hand. One fisherman lifts a small bowl of water, a simple wooden dish, and sets it on the sand. The surface trembles, not with waves but with tiny directional ripples running from east to west. He points. There. The wind is circling. The fishermen exchange glances, not scared, but focused. This is the moment their ancestors whispered about around fires, when the world shifts quietly before roaring loudly. Historians still argue whether Vikings possessed a formal system for reading these signs, or if their knowledge was more instinctive, a blend of myth, routine, and experience. But as you stand here with them, watching their precise, synchronized reactions, you realize something. They aren't guessing. They're reading the wind, reading the water, reading the way the night rearranges itself. A younger fisherman jogs to the far end of the beach, climbs onto a rock, and whistles twice a high, sharp sound. Moments later, two figures appear from the shadows carrying crates, dried fish, coils of rope, and a small barrel of drinking water. You step back to avoid getting in the way. This is preparation, quick and quiet. The kind a community performs not because they're terrified, but because they've lived with the sea long enough to know respect. A sudden gust blows across the beach, hard enough to flap your cloak against your legs. The fishermen pause at the same time, all looking in the same direction, as if the wind itself shouted a command. It's turning, the elder says. You don't need him to explain. You feel it. The temperature shifts. The air thickens. There's a hint of metallic sharpness biting at the back of your throat again. The storm is no longer a rumor. It's a presence. A calm settles over the group. Not peaceful calm, purposeful calm. The kind that comes in the thin line of time before a decision. The elder fisherman steps forward, his voice steady. We must bring the boats inland. The younger men nod immediately, but there's a complication. One longship is anchored too far out. Wading there in the rising tide would be slow, dangerous. Before you can express concern, two fishermen are already running toward the water. Wait, you start. The elder puts a hand on your arm. They have done this since before I was born. You watch them plunge into the cold surf, pushing through chest-high waves, their outlines glowing faintly with bioluminescence. It looks surreal, two men outlined in stars, fighting water that grows heavier with every second. Your breath catches as they reach the rope, wrestle it loose, and begin towing the boat inward. Every muscle in their bodies strains. Every wave pulls against them. But inch by inch, the boat moves with them. When they return to shore, panting, dripping, you feel relief so sharp it almost hurts. The elder nods. It will be enough. The wind howls longer, deeper. You look out at the dark horizon, which now feels like it's leaning toward you. Will the storm hit tonight? You ask. The elder shakes his head slowly. No, tonight is when it decides. A shiver runs along your spine. You finally understand the title forming in your mind. The Night Before a Gale. Everything tonight is a conversation between the sea and the sky, one gaining strength, the other holding its breath. And you, standing among these weather readers, are learning to listen. The fishermen gather their tools, tie down the last ropes, and prepare their homes. Lamps glow warmly across the village, but no one lingers outside. Everyone, it seems, can feel what you feel. The invisible storm is tightening its circle. Tomorrow will speak louder. But tonight murmurs the warning. You and the fishermen stand on the dim shoreline long enough for the night to settle into its true depth. The invisible storm breathes somewhere beyond the horizon, not close enough to strike, but close enough to make the air feel strangely alive, like something humming underneath the world. The wind doesn't howl, it thinks, drifting in slow, heavy pulls that make the grass flatten and rise like a sleeping animal. One of the fishermen nudges you gently. Come, well, rest here. Rest? Now? With a storm deciding its personality just beyond sight? But they lead you anyway toward a long, low boathouse, perched above the tide line. Its walls are dark with age, carved with runes so worn that only the oldest among them can still read their shapes. When you step inside, the scent of tarred wood, old nets, and cold seawater gathers around you like a blanket. It's not unpleasant, more like the smell of a life lived honestly and without hurry. A lantern is lit in the corner, its small yellow heart struggling bravely against the shadows. The men lower themselves onto benches, barrels, coils of rope. You take a seat on an overturned fishing crate, which creaks under your weight in a tone that suggests it has opinions. For a long moment, nobody speaks. It's the kind of silence that only exists in places where people already understand each other. Finally, one of the younger fishermen breaks it. You feel it now, don't you? The sea thinking. You nod, because you do. The silence outside isn't stillness, it's calculation. A mainstream historical fact floats up. Many Norse communities believed storms weren't just weather. They were events shaped by the moods of the sea and sky. Fishermen watched the behavior of the ocean, the way you might observe someone deciding what to say next. And tonight, the ocean feels indecisive. The old fisherman laces his fingers together. His hands are rough, marked with scars from nets, hooks, and ropes, yet he touches the air with surprising gentleness. Storms speak before they strike. Always, but not in words, not in clouds. No, they speak in the way the world hesitates, or breathes, or tightens. Another fisherman adds, the trick is knowing which whisper to trust. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly perceived storms through instinct alone, or whether centuries of observation simply refined their senses into something close to intuition. Either way, sitting here among them, you realize it hardly matters. Their confidence isn't mystical, it's practical. A vocabulary built from wind and waves rather than books and barometers. The boathouse creaks softly as the wind presses against its walls. Outside, the tide shifts with a deep shudder, rolling pebbles like distant thunder in miniature. The men rise again, not in fear, but out of necessity. Rest time is over. It's time to make their final choices. You follow them outside into the cold night, where the faint glow of the village sits like a cluster of stars on land. Torches flicker along the harbor path, and people move quietly, efficiently, as if rehearsed for nights like this. One of the fishermen walks toward a half-buried stone marker, etched with simple lines. He brushes off sand and nods to himself. You step closer. What's that? Windstone, he replies. Shows the direction of a storm's breath if you read the grains right. You peer at it and see nothing except sand and stone being sand and stone. He, however, studies how grains settle in the shallow carvings, how they cling to certain angles, how moisture darkens one edge more than another. So early, he frowns. Storms pulling north already. Another fisherman tightens the last knot on a tarp-covered boat. We need to warn the inland families. You feel your chest tighten. Should we be worried? The old fisherman shakes his head. No fear, only preparation. A quirky tidbit resurfaces in your mind. Some Viking families believed that if a storm shifted directions after sunset, it meant unseen spirits were guiding it. Not maliciously, just playfully. A reminder that nature, in their worldview, had personality. And tonight, the storm feels like a creature stretching and testing its limbs. A sudden gust rushes past you, strong enough to make your hair whip across your face. The fishermen react instantly, all turning west in perfect unison. You taste the air again, without thinking, and there it is. Warmth trying to climb through the cold, salt sharpening on your tongue, moisture thickening, like the sky inhaling before a long sigh. You glance at them, and their expressions confirm it. It will be here by sunrise, one murmurs, or sooner, but no one runs. No one raises their voice. Instead, they move with the calm of people who have lived by the rules of wind and tide longer than they've walked on land. They pull the smaller boats higher, double-check ropes, secure nets, cover oars, tie down barrels and crates. And as they work, the village works with them, families passing stones, children holding lanterns, elders murmuring soft guidance. Every Viking settlement was a machine built of people, and tonight it moves like clockwork. You lend your hands where you can, passing rope, steadying planks, holding lanterns against the wind. The men thank you with small nods, nothing more. Respect here is wordless. When the last rope is tied, the old fisherman gestures for you to follow him down to the water's edge. He crouches, dips his fingers into the dark sea, and tastes the droplets. Almost ready, he whispers. You mimic him. The taste hits differently now. Salt, cold, mineral bitterness, and underneath, the faintest metallic hum, a signature you now recognize. The wind gathering power. The water shifts again, a long, low roll that bumps against your boots. That's it, he says. The storm has spoken. You straighten slowly. The horizon is disappearing into darker shadow. Clouds are gathering, but not in visible lines, more like a thickening, a quiet merging of night with something denser. You and the fisherman walk back toward the village, the wind nudging at your back like a firm hand urging you along. Lanterns sway wildly now, tossing their light across wooden walls like restless spirits. When you reach the center of the harbor, everyone pauses at once. No cue, no shout. They simply feel the shift, and you feel it too. The air settles into an expectant hush, the kind before a decision, the kind before release. The old fisherman places a hand on your shoulder. Now we wait, he murmurs, and tomorrow we'll see what the storm decided. You stand there with him, feet planted on the cold earth, watching the night thicken until the world becomes one deep, breathing shadow. And in that moment, surrounded by wind, wood, and waiting souls, you understand why Viking fishermen trusted whispers more than tools. Because the world always spoke to them, they had simply learned how to listen.